All right, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today in What to Expect in 2022 Emerging Tech and Consumer Trends, brought to you by GroundTruth. My name is Mike Brooks. I'm the SVP of Revenue, and I'm going to be your MC for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get into things, let's talk a little bit about the ground rules. So let's start here. Everybody's going to stay muted, but we encourage people to chat in the chat function that is separate from Q&A. So if you have Q&A that you'd like to submit, please submit that in the Q&A function and we'll address those at the end altogether. Beyond that, the follow-up email to connect with us is adexpert@groundtruth.com or connect with your GroundTruth representative. And we are ready to rock. So today we have three spectacular conversations around seismic shifts that are happening in the ads and media industry. We're going to open with Nicole, who's going to share a keynote on emerging tech and consumer trends about how the habits and how our habits have evolved in the past year and how those are being reflected in the media and ad tech landscapes. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what advertising looks like in a post-privacy world. And then I'm going to invite Tom to join me on stage and school me a little bit in how to get into CTV. So we have a jam-packed schedule. Again, thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time to talking to us today. There's so much news going on in the industry, so much change in what we do. Learning is super important for us, and we're so happy to share it with you. With that, look, we're 2 years into this pandemic. We're in the midst of a slow return to normalcy. And I myself see my behavior changing even now compared to how it was 6 months ago or even before that. And as marketers, it's super important for us to stay on top of that. With that, I'd like to introduce Nicole, the Director of Marketing Research and Insights here at GroundTruth, who's going to talk to us about consumer trends. Take it away, Nicole.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm thrilled to be kicking us off today. So we know the past few years have been anything but predictable, but when it comes to consumer behavior, we're finally starting to see some stabilization. As a result, we have a good handle on the consumer trends we're likely to see in the months to come. Drawing from up-to-the-minute industry data, today I'll be sharing our top 5 trends to watch in 2022. So as you devise your marketing strategies for the coming year, be sure to take these key facts into account. So let's get started with consumer trend number 1, which is time spent with connected devices is still on the rise. So between the lockdown days of the pandemic and our increased dependence on mobile devices, it isn't surprising that smartphones continue to dominate media time. Consumers now average 4 hours and 29 minutes on mobile every day. But smartphones and tablets aren't the only devices, drawing our attention. They're also spending 1 hour and 56 minutes on their laptop or desktop and 1 hour and 44 minutes on other connected devices, which basically encompasses smart TVs, connected TVs, which we refer to as CTV, and internet-connected gaming consoles. It's important to note, though, that the majority of growth there in that group is attributed to CTV specifically. Over-the-top streaming services, or OTT, as we refer, like Netflix and Hulu, are gaining an even greater share of consumer time after their pandemic surge as well. A whopping 82 million households now stream about 100 hours of OTT content each month, and I can attest to that. Currently, I'm binge watching Yellow Jackets. So as we move on to consumer trend number 2, we see that traditional TV viewing will decrease after an unexpected uptick during the pandemic. So there are only so many hours in the day, which means consumers have to decrease the time they spend with some forms of media to make room for others. So in 2020, TV consumption actually increased for the first time in 8 years as viewers turned to the TV for pandemic and US election news. But now the pendulum is swinging back again and viewership is actually below 2019 levels. So the average US adult will spend 15 fewer minutes engaging with traditional TV this year compared to last year. And on-demand streaming options and the cord-cutting trend make it likely that this will continue In fact, eMarketer predicts the 15-minute loss can turn into an additional 11-minute loss heading into 2023, as you can see from the chart below. We're just continually seeing a decrease in time spent there. Slide, consumer trend number 3. So as consumers continue to spend again, the majority will be shopping in physical stores. So when it comes to shopping habits, expect consumers to drift back to physical stores after the record-breaking online holiday shopping season of 2021. In fact, according to census data, 87% of Q3 2021 sales occurred in physical retail stores. And so, of course, there are some categories that will see more in-store shopping than others, including packaged food and beverages, over-the-counter healthcare products, hair care products, and household cleaning products. And with these type of products, you can see from the chart that consumers are likely to make their purchase in-store. When you head down the chart, you see the categories where people are more undecided, like tech products, appliances, and other items like smartphones that as of right now are not even available in stores. You know, I tried to go into store to buy my latest smartphone, Apple phone, and I had to order it online and wait. So that's when it's really convenient for shoppers to have the option there. Consumer trend number 4. Consumers will be lured back in stores with curated experiences and new technology. So there's another reason more consumers will be shopping in physical retailers this year, and that's the sheer pleasure of an in-store shopping experience. Studies show that 48% of consumers prefer to shop in store when given the choice, and approximately 35% of shoppers favor in-store shopping because they actually enjoy the experience. So that experience is about to get even better. In the year to come, we'll see more companies embrace the concept of retailtainment, a strategy that can both attract shoppers and drive repeat visitors. From digitized in-store shopping experiences to self-checkout, mobile scan as you go, and cashierless checkout like that offered by Amazon Go, retailers are elevating their in-store experience. As you can see from the chart, other reasons include wanting to see and touch products before they buy them, avoiding high shipping costs, and not wanting to wait for delivery. So really the urgency of needing products right at that moment. Our last trend is that consumers will embrace QR codes in an evolving contactless world. So along the same lines, we anticipate that shoppers will return to stores this year with the expectation that they'll encounter helpful tools that connect physical and digital shopping. More than 150 million people made a click and collect purchase in 2021, and their interest in this method of shopping will continue. I saw that eMarketer put it, shoppers embraced click and collect for the safety, but they will stay for the convenience. I actually went to Target yesterday and was just blown away about how much parking spot inventory was like, devoted to curbside pickup lanes. So that was definitely a little bit of a shock to me, but I think people do find the convenience in just pulling up and having someone run out their groceries to them. It's pretty cool. So in addition to that, watch for QR code payment options and ads to get a boost this year as well. It's safe to say the Coinbase QR code ad during the Super Bowl was a success, directing more than 20 million hits to the landing page in 1 minute, which was 6 times the projected engagement. And it certainly caused quite a stir. It was a great marketing effort that has even evolved into a Twitter war this week over who deserves credit for the campaign. So anyway, as consumers become more familiar with QR codes on restaurant menus and Super Bowl ads, they'll continue to use them for increased convenience. The number of QR code interactions increased by 94% from 2018 to 2020, and there's definitely more growth on the way. In fact, 3 out of 4 US adults are willing to use more QR codes in the future when polled last June. And that's the chart you're seeing on the screen here. And as you can see, that number increases for that 18 to 29 and even the 30 to 44 age range. So definitely be prepared to see more QR codes popping up. So those are the top 5 consumer trends for 2022. Pivoting a little bit to go into the day-to-day work that I do for GroundTruth, I'm continuously monitoring trends based on the 30 billion annual consumer visits we see on our platform. Each month, we release an insights report called The Lean. It's designed for easy consumption and quick reference. So you really get the trends that you need to know without having to read drawn out white papers, because honestly, who has the time for those anymore? But it applies all of our offline behavioral data and other industry sources like the ones I shared with you today to current consumer trends to help you understand the impact they're having on business outcomes like visits and sales. So this is a sneak peek of the report we're releasing next week for the grocery category specifically. And this one slide from the report depicts our day-over-day foot traffic to grocery stores from November 1st until February 15th, 2022. And we always do a look back period of about 3 months. This one was a little longer because I wanted to see how the Super Bowl impacted grocery visits. So you can see there on the right, that spike is foot traffic up about 50% on Super Bowl Sunday compared to the entire prior time frame. So it's really just a sneak peek of, the insights report that will be coming out next week and all of the type of insights that we do. So if you're interested in seeing things like this for your vertical or your brand specifically, please subscribe to our newsletter. We send those out each month with all of the, newest content that we put out, or reach out to your GroundTruth rep for more information. That's all I have for you today. Please keep these trends in mind as you plan your approach for connecting with consumers this year. I'll hand the mic back over to Mike to talk to you about cookies. So thank you.
Amazing job. Thanks, Nicole. I am all in on retailtainment, by the way, both as a new name, but also I love having fun in stores. And it's also interesting to see how the things that you talk about I see reflected in my day-to-day life. So thank you for sharing that. One more administrative update, everybody, for the 5th time for Q&A. In the Q&A chat at the bottom, that's where you're going to submit your questions and we'll address them at the end. So keep submitting there, and that's where we'll be picking from. Excellent. So now we will get to the second part of the story, which is the future of media in a cookieless world. My name is Mike Brooks. I am your MC, but I'm also the SVP of Revenue at WeatherBug. And let me talk a little bit about what that means. So I have kind of 2 major sides of my job. I have the monetization side, so sales and programmatic and how we make money from people using our media property, and then marketing and UA, user acquisition. How do we bring more people in? How do we increase the brand value? Just a little high level, WeatherBug is an omni-channel media company that serves 14 million users in the US. 2 things to consider as you hear our point of view on things. One, we're mostly mobile app. So things like iOS 14 and privacy changes in mobile impact us more directly than folks who are majority web-based. And the other is we're mostly monetized by advertising today. So a lot of the implications we're going to talk about of these big shifts in tech, we're going to focus on the ads ecosystem. But with that ground rule, let me kind of talk about the 3 things that we're going to bring up today. One is, what is the news, the changing ad tech and privacy landscape? Like, what's going on? The second is, if you are a publisher, how can you best adapt? And 3, if you are a marketer, how can you take advantage? So those are the 3 chunks of our convo today. Let's hop right into it with setting the stage. So let's talk about what's at stake with we're going to do some buzzword bingo today, but before we do that, let's just talk about the scope of the things we're talking about today. Really boil down to 2 major components. It's targeting and attribution. So very generally, targeting is the ability to recognize a user across sessions and apply data. Attribution is the ability to link an off-platform digital conversion with the media that drove it. these allow marketers deeper access to information, and that resulting value is shared with the publisher, right? So WeatherBug is a publisher. When someone is able to identify an auto intender, for example, they will pay more for that impression, and we get to participate in that upside. So when we look as an industry, like how this is tactically implemented, we look at things like behavioral targeting with third party. We look at things like retargeting, cross-site frequency capping. And in the attribution world, you can think about it either as anything from an app install to, showing an ad on Facebook and having somebody convert on Nike.com. So this is what we use the groundwork for. And now I'll kind of talk about what's happening and how these might be changing. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this part of the talk I kind of call a tale of three cities. And this is the first time I get to have this talk because the Android news of what the world of privacy is going to look like just came out in mid-February. So this is like brand spanking new, and the first time that we can see what the world looks like in what we'll call these like omni-channel Venn diagram. So there are three ecosystems that have kind of come out of this, the fracturing of these roles. So you have a web ecosystem, and that's generally managed by Chrome. And their proposal for a post-privacy world is called the Chrome Sandbox. You may have heard of it. The Sandbox is a compilation of 23 proposals on how Chrome can help the advertising ecosystem. We'll talk about kind of the three different worlds. What to know about this world. It goes into effect, it says late 2023 is when support stops, so probably early 2024, late 2023. But still today, this list of proposals is way too complex. It goes after use cases like attribution and targeting, which are important, but also aggregation and context and trust tokens and credential management and a whole lot of things that it thinks it has to do to create value, and maybe it does, but it makes for a very complex read as to what is the future of web. I would say of all three ecosystems of web, iOS, and Android, web is probably the furthest away of what it's going to look like once it's completed. Now let's talk about like the second world, which is iOS. This is one we've been talking about for a while because this was announced at WWDC in June of 2020 that iOS is going to make the idea of tracking opt-in. So they're going to define tracking as sharing data across companies, and they're going to require their own opt-in. So when we think about the iOS ecosystem, it is by far the most restrictive. The majority of users are not going to opt in. So to be able to generate value on those impressions, the opt-in may not carry for the entire value, and value in the iOS ecosystem has gone down. One other quick note on the iOS world, I'm going to say this, maybe this is the first time you're hearing this acronym or word, but SK Ad Network. That is a specific system that Apple set up to do its own version of computing the way that Google is, and we'll talk about that. Thirdly, let's get into the most recent news, and that's the Android Sandbox that was announced, I think, just last week. The Android Sandbox, compared to the 23 proposals on web, is really 4 proposals, and it covers things that we really need. It covers attribution, it covers targeting, it covers context, and it covers data management. So far, that's it. There's still proposals that will be negotiated over time, but when I look at these 3 worlds of what a future advertising ecosystem is, there's only a couple things that each of these worlds share together. And we'll talk about some of that, but it's important to note that the rules start setting up 3 different worlds that publishers, advertisers, and marketers have to kind of understand and be able to navigate to achieve reach and scale. All right, next slide, please. So what happens in the real world when these changes happen? Like I said, iOS 14 has been live for almost a year now. But let's break it down again into the 2 buckets of targeting and attribution, right? What happens is if advertisers can't identify that specific valuable audience, if they can't say, I'm looking for an auto intender, then that media, especially programmatically, becomes less valuable. What happens then is publishers make less money, but also advertiser reach is very much suppressed, right? Your scale on iOS is cut into a quarter of what it was if you're applying technologies from the past. So that's on the targeting world. You see, iOS CPMs, how much money folks make from their ads in iOS on the publishing side. That has gone down in iOS because of this change. But I think more interestingly and probably more publicly is the focus of attribution. So let's look at Facebook, right? Facebook's news from a couple of weeks ago, they lost 20+% of their overall market cap, of their overall value, because of their inability to attribute buying on platform to purchases outside of that platform. So as marketers, we know that we will focus on ROI, and our investments will trend to where we can measure. And with these new rules, at least in the short term on iOS, that isn't Facebook. So what happens? We see huge changes in the public markets, and we also see M&A picking up as people are taking advantage of these. Look for a lot more of both of these things, of big companies coming to a reckoning with it, but also new technologies and people taking advantage of these opportunities. So the good news is I have the playbook for success for both publishers and advertisers, and I'm here to share it with you. So that's the good news. Let's start with publishers, if we could, please. Next slide. So I've been talking about these three different worlds, and I've made it this long without sharing, but there are really two things and only two things that scale across the rules of iOS, Android, and web. That is that when data is derived from interaction with your product and is not combined with other data, it is first-party data and isn't beholden to the rules of a sandbox or the app tracking transparency framework. So if it's data that you generate and that you connect with buyers that's based on just your data, that is and will always be money. The other component, though, and this is more of the scientific innovation part, is on-device computing. So what's happening in AdTech and advertising as a whole is audiences used to be created at the DSP level or the DMP level, and ad buyers would push those audiences down. What's happening in the future is that decisioning is happening on the device, on the phone, on the browser. So this concept of moving the decisioning of am I in an audience from my cloud servers down to an SDK or some infrastructure that Apple or Google sets up, that's what we're talking about here. So this is something you're going to hear a lot more of as the new technologies of a post-privacy world come out. It's going to revolve a lot around on-device computing. A quick aside is both SKAdNetwork and the Sandbox are qualified as on-device computing. So not only are Apple and Google talking the talk, but they're building their own implementations for on-device infrastructure. If you look at the comparison, Google is taking a much wider approach and going after lots and lots of use cases. Apple, not as much. SKAdNetwork is really just app attribution and a little bit of non-app attribution. There's a ton of white space. Look for innovation here around the on-device computing component, as well as bring first-party data to buyers. One quick point, like at WeatherBug, what are we doing about this? Two things. One, we're investing in our first-party data ad product and go-to-market. So helping our clients, our media buying clients, transition from a world of addressability to non-addressability and building products to make that happen. The other is we are doing a ton of work to partner with the on-device pioneers to answer for this technical future, especially in iOS. But now that the Google rules have come out, it's going to be super important for us to stay very close to the innovators there. So that's what we can do as a publisher. I'm going to take my publisher hat off, and I'm going to put on my marketer hat, because again, I run marketing in UA. And I'll ask the question, how do we take advantage of this? How do we position our businesses to win, to eat while everybody else is running away? I'm going to talk about a couple themes that you'll recognize here, but by aligning them to, I'll explain that how each of these are really are going to help move your marketing KPIs. In targeting, the easiest way to say this right now is if you are buying programmatically or you're buying with data the way that you were a year and a half ago, which isn't unreasonable, your iOS scale has been cut into a quarter. So right now, if you're trying to reach a qualified iOS high value audience, it's very likely that you are not, and you're under indexing on that. Your media partners probably aren't talking about it, but that's what's happening in the short term. When you can answer for targeting in first party and others, you achieve scale to the other 30% plus of your inventory that may not have opted into tracking. And that's going to be super important. So if you're going to maximize and achieve scale where your competitors are not, it's going to be about leaning into and reaching these users that right now are unreachable. The second component is attribution. And again, like I said, our money goes towards ROI. We have to be able to count it, and then we have to be able to rank it. So what are we doing as a marketing team? We're trying to become best friends with those 3 reporting platforms across Chrome, Android, and iOS, or finding a partner that can help you navigate it. I think the learnings that are going to come from this new world of on-device technology and computing are going to be incredibly accretive, but will need translation. So finding somebody, especially in the attribution space, who can help you translate is probably one of the most immediate needs and with the biggest upsides. One little component I'll add here with a star is like, if you need an internal ID for the way that you run your business, and you're using a device ID that's issued by big tech, you need to stop. You probably have a few months left, but one of the biggest components with attribution, understanding how your business is growing in relation to digital, this becomes much murkier, and access to these identifiers diminishes. So if you're running something and an IDFA is the key value, talk to your CTO, get out of that. You need to have your own internal IDs. The last thing I'll say, and this talks to, Nicole mentioned it, the Coinbase QR code in the Super Bowl, right? One of the things that these challenges present in a digital space is the opportunity for us as marketers to be more flexible than ever, and for us to be creative, right? Like, because the way that budgets were allocated 3 years ago may be different, and the way we can measure effectiveness is changing. It's an opportunity for us to merge digital and the real world and provide a ton of value. So the way I challenge our marketing teams is, find and capitalize on unique value add partners. And when it comes to building for the future, like the future we just talked about, you're either in or you're out. So find the partners who are differentiating, who are providing value, and who are willing to answer these tough questions that we're talking about in a thoughtful way. So if you're a marketer, that's how you get ahead of this. If you're a publisher, that's how you get ahead of it. A lot of change. I'm sure we'll do an update on this in a couple weeks as this story unfolds. But that's the up to the minute news. So thank you all so much for joining me there on that journey. And now we get to a spectacular conversation where I'm going to invite Tom Donoghue, the VP of CTV Sales at GroundTruth, to the stage. Welcome,
Hi,
Tom.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
I am spectacular. Thanks so much for joining on the podcast today. We have,
Mike, first time, long time, right?
As you know, the marketing at WeatherBug has made a lot of evolution and change. So I love getting your perspective on how things are changing in the ecosystem and how budget allocation is changing with your partners and things. So I'm going to ask you a ton of questions to pick your brain, and I'm going to hopefully employ as many of these as I can in my marketing plan. But my plan is to badger you with questions, and if you have anything you want to throw at me, it's only fair. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that's great. Great.
Excellent. So let me kick it off then. Like I said, I've been fascinated by this evolution of media, and there's so much in the digital space that we just talked about, but like TV is such a big beast. And I feel like everything I hear, everything I read today talks about this like inflection point that we're in, like the relationship between CTV and linear. walk me through where we are from an ecosystem perspective and how I, as a marketer, can think about those two things.
Okay. Before I do that, I'll full disclosure, I'm a total history nerd. And so I love to kind of look at what the evolution of things are. It doesn't even matter what those things are. But just for the context of media, the first radio ad was run by AT&T over 100 years ago. Okay.
That's wild.
So prior to radio starting to get a piece of those ad budgets, which were nascent, they were all print. Everything that was advertised was a print ad or a sandwich board of somebody walking up and down Third Avenue. But when you get to radio and radio makes that first piercing bubble of an AT&T spot, it opens up the opportunity for others to start playing in that space. And so now you have this tug of war of ad budgets between print demonstrating its efficacy versus radio demonstrating its efficacy. In 1941, over 20 years later, television runs its first spot. It was a Bulova watch commercial during a Brooklyn Dodgers game. Mike, that spot was, I think it was 7 seconds or 10 seconds, and it cost $9.
Wow.
Right.
Do you know what the CPM was?
It doesn't. I mean, the eCPM on that was it doesn't. You can't even measure it. There's not enough zeros on the calculator to measure it because it's in the New York City DMA. It's a question of how many people had a television in 1941, right?
Crazy.
But now you go back and you look at this historical lineage. You've got print, which dominates the landscape for hundreds of years, right? Moving to radio, moving to television, and then television becomes the model for the next 25 or so years until you start getting into deep penetration of cable TV. And in 1989, a cable subscription cost $16. Today, cable costs close to $100 a month, which means that people are starting to make decisions on the economics of where they're going to watch their programming, which is leading us to this cord cutter and cord never moment. And it's not even generational. I'm a boomer, and my son is, Gen Z, and, neither one of us want to pay for cable when we can get our programming OTT wise or CTV wise or through subscription on demand. And so the whole landscape has evolved to create this really fragmented moment for advertisers, which is the painful piece of this, right? I think for a lot of folks. All of this has created millions of channels, millions of opportunities, but everybody's scattered all over the landscape. How do you find them, right? And that's where I think marketers are struggling a little bit with what they're with how they're trying to place their budgets and get the best return on ad spend.
Got it. That's amazing, and I learned. So I love those history points. So thank you for sharing. I think about the change that we have going from linear to connected TV, and I think about some of the changes that occurred in other points in the evolution of media. And sometimes it's things like targeting, sometimes it's things like attribution. But as we think about linear and connected TV, and people have been so used to buying in that, and they're starting to get more into connected TV, there are technical differentiators in this world that you can do things that you couldn't do in TV, right? And that's an enormous driver for that business as well as so many people moving over, right? How much of it is talk to me about that and the technology spanning and what CTV gets us to.
Yeah. Linear, I come from a digital media background, but I also come from a broadcasting background. And I love all the people who I know who continue to sell local TV. But at the same time, I think that what marketers are coming to grips with is the ability to measure the value of a spot on linear TV has never really been good in the first place. It's always just been kind of GRP based, which is just reach times frequency. And it's a little, it allows us to be unforgiving in the measurement, but that is no longer valuable to brands and marketers. They need measurement. They need efficacy in the measurement. And I think that's where something like CTV, and digital in general, but I think CTV in particular, as it relates to the big screen, starts to kind of weave its way into that narrative of how do you do big screen advertising in a convergent way? And convergent it's a buzzword that folks use, but it basically just means getting the best of linear TV's brand, shotgun approach, right? Where you have no targeting. You're not going to measure efficacy in a meaningful way unless it's a DRTV spot. You're just really just blasting it out there and getting your message out for what you think is a reasonably low CPM. In return, you get back some reporting that tells you like, we think your household reach was X, right? And think versus know is a dangerous thing for marketers. They need to know. And I think that's where CTV steps in and says, wait a minute, you want to target a specific audience. So you're looking for golfers in northern New Jersey who are high net worth individuals. And when you can create an audience and then you can find that audience and then you can only target that audience regardless of what connected TV content they're consuming, whether it's Cops or Bloomberg, it doesn't matter. What we're looking for is the person, not the publisher. And when you can do that and you can hit the mark and you can measure it, oh my God, you've got a win. So the way I kind of look at this, Mike, is if you're buying linear, you need to start thinking about moving some of that budget, not all of it, some of that budget over to connected TV to find the extended reach of cord cutters and cord nevers who are not going to see your spot if you're just buying linear. And I genuinely, it isn't even just self-serving. I genuinely believe that meshing of those two mediums in the big screen is the best solution for marketers today.
Yeah, and to be honest, what's going on in my mind is we talk a lot about the line between branding and performance. And when you can take a brand medium like that, but apply targeting still in a cost-effective way, like that's kind of what we're going for, especially as a brand who is investing a lot in both driving new users, but also increasing a brand halo. So,
well, tell me about, wait, let me ask you a question. Tell me about that. So how do you, as the person in charge of WeatherBug, it's not only revenue generation, but the way in which you are attempting to acquire a broader audience for what I think is the best weather platform. Literally, I really do. I'm not just saying that. Like, I think it's an amazing platform. It's so user friendly. But how do you, like, as the person in charge, Mike, how are you looking at the distribution of your ad dollars to achieve the success you need?
Great question. To be clear, there are much smarter people in the team handling the specifics of this question. So I can give you kind of the high level story about how our media planning has evolved over the past few years. And it really plays into this narrative too, because, 3 or 4 years ago, our entire media plan was DR. It was search and it was preloads for us. And, we were spending a decent amount of money, but all on DR. And then we started to look at, we started to question kind of what is the value, what is the force multiplier that investing in the brand can drive? And then if you look at that, us trying to answer that question, and then you look at the weight in our budget that people historically would call branding, but let's call it like sight, sound, and motion for us. That's now taking up 40% of our budget. So as we think about how the brand has evolved and how we're connecting with consumers, it's about telling that story. And again, it's about, it has been surprising to me, coming from a very heavy DR background, what the halo effect is, like what happens with branding and what happens with TV and what happens with CTV is the conversion rate on your digital increases. So thinking about it in that more balanced way has challenged us to think about developing a more effective media plan. And we have gotten better and better and better over time by including this as part of the story. So maybe next year when we hang out and we have the same show, that number will be up to 50 or 60, but it has definitely been the biggest change that we've experienced on the media side. That's awesome.
That's awesome. Nicole spent a lot of time, gratefully, talking about QR codes. We've been running QR codes for our clients on CTV since July of last year. And so we've run, I don't know how many campaigns, not a lot, it's dozens of campaigns that had QR codes built into the CTV side of them. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, considering the, the embryonic state of that space, not just CTV, but also like, oh my God, we're adding something to that. Yeah. But what we did was our creative team thought, why don't we add some overlays to these spots to make them more, not actionable, but just more memorable, right? So your recall was better. But then I'm sitting here and I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like I went to a restaurant with my wife in June of last year and I had to scan the QR code on the menu. And I'm like, this is brilliant. I'm doing this. And so our creative team starts putting these QR codes in these spots, and lo and behold, people are scanning them, Mike. And I'm like, whoa, I think we might be onto something here. This year, we are lucky because we have upgraded our capabilities, and we are now partnered with Flowcode, which is a brilliant technical organization led by some really smart people. And their capabilities are going to further expand our ability to help our clients leverage this client engagement capability. And I've written a lot about this, and anybody who follows me on LinkedIn has read my stuff on this. My wife doesn't want to hear about QR codes anymore. But the fact is, the consumer journey has to become an intimate step between the spot and engagement in the spot. And if you are targeting the right audience on CTV, so I'm sitting at home, I'm watching Game of Thrones on ad-supported CTV, a spot comes on for Mike Brooks' Cadillac, and I go, man, that's the car I want. And there's a QR code in that. I'm scanning it. And then it flings me out to Mike Brooks' Cadillac. And now you've got me. And you talked about this before, Mike. You talked about the cookieless world and the disassociation of that from marketers. Like, oh my God, what are we going to do? One, I'll say this right now. If you're a marketer, you better get your strategy together now, because first-party data is going to be the only thing that is going to save you. The good thing about CTV is we don't rely on cookies. So, we're fine. We're relatively agnostic and insulated from that. But the consumer journey has to have some connection point between the CTV spot or a television spot for that matter, where if we can embed the QR code in your TV spot, GroundTruth can do that for you. But the beautiful thing is, if I do that and I take somebody to Mike Brooks' Cadillac and you say to me, would you be interested in coming in for a test drive? And I go, yeah, for sure. And then your chatbot or your microsite, the landing page, just ask me for my email address. Two things have happened. One, you've created a brand intimate connection with me. And two, you've acquired some first party data that you can use to remarket.
That's where my head was going, like CRM population and like giving folks an opportunity to self-identify into your business that didn't have that opportunity before. That's wild.
Willingly, Mike. I mean, because you have targeted them with a spot that is relevant to their interests based on the way GroundTruth builds its audiences, which is real world foot traffic data and behavior. If I know that these people are golfers and high net worth individuals and they are in market for a car and I can serve them a Cadillac ad, I'm hitting the bullseye right where I need to hit them. But if I get that one step further and I'm like, hey, let's really communicate. And I give you the option to do that with a QR code, bang, done. First party data, I've got an intimate brand relationship. Oh, and you mentioned search before, Mike. So I don't know what the percentage is, but it's like 7 out of 10 people who watch a TV spot have their phone on them. And a number of people in CTV, percentage of them, will actually view the ad and then they'll just go out to the Google, which my mom calls it the Google, which I love. So she'll go out to the Google and she'll type in Mike Brooks Cadillac, right? You've been outbid by 5 of your competitors. You are below the fold on the SRP for Google, and you have essentially lost your competitive advantage that you bought with that impression. With a QR code, you avoid all of that. It's literally an Uber ride. It's point to point. It's spot to your site. And that is exactly what marketers need. They don't want to thread the needle through a Google search result page that puts them in a competitive environment. So I think to me, it just kind of makes sense.
That's such a good point. And we think about how search integrates with this at the end of the day. How can that impact how you allocate investments in the big picture? Like that's real stuff.
Mike, the cost of acquisition, right? Cost CPA or CAC or whatever acronym you want to use is extraordinary on paid search. I mean, it's really high. I mean, just Legal and financial services is something like $86. Why? That just, to me, in a sophisticated marketing universe where you can isolate the audience you want, pay only for that spot, and then achieve the objective that you want, why does money keep flowing towards Google's coffers? I mean, no knock on Google or Bing or anybody else.
That's another webinar, Tom. That's next week's webinar.
There are more cost-efficient and elegant solutions to achieve your objective, which is, customer acquisition or brand engagement or intimacy with the brand, than those kind of time-worn ways of doing it. 2009 called and they want their marketing budgets back, right? So
nice.
That's just,
I love
coming
that.
at it.
I love that. And the other thing to mention too, when you're talking about the Coinbase QR code, right? Like they drove 20 million hits in like a minute. Like as a marketer, I don't know how much money it would take me to get 20 million hits to my website, but like, it's not one deal, it's not one thing. And granted, it's part of being in the Super Bowl, but like that's so many people.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You need 100 million eyeballs in order to get that kind of pull, right? But 20% pull on 100 million eyeballs in a minute is insane, right? So their ROI was beautiful. I mean, it was, and they only really wanted people who were committed. So they knew that they were going to get an inordinate amount of just draft, right? But their goal was kind of like really to get that brand engagement moment on the biggest stage where their dollars were going to generate the right return. And I thought it was, it was pretty smart, right? But I think that they've opened the door to other brands to be able to do those embedded QR codes in their spots as well, both on television and on CTV.
I'm with you. The one asterisk I would say is like, it takes a village to execute a digital strategy, and 2/3 of those website visits bounced because the site crashed. But as long as your CTO is in the loop, like let's make some money.
Yes, for sure.
So Tom, I want to leave us a little bit of time for Q&A, but I have one more question for you. Let's say I'm a marketer, which I am, and I'm looking to make, let's call this my first 50K investment into connected TV. Mm-hmm. How should I think about my first investment?
Well, first of all, and again, this is a GroundTruth plug, but I'll just do it anyway.
Do it.
50 grand's a lot of money for a test to me. We don't have minimums on the GroundTruth side. So if I would always, and I do coach marketers, like if you've never done this before, let's be a little bit more intelligent about the investment. Let's make it 10 grand, right? Because if you do 10 grand, it gives you that extra 40 sitting in your budget where when this thing works, and it will, because we are only going to be able to measure video completion rate, QR scans, foot traffic visitation, things like that. So there are fundamental things that are measured in a CTV spot. But what we want to start with is audience. Think about audience first. If we can pin down your audience in the most efficient way, and your geo, of course, then the rest of this generally kind of takes care of itself. So your creative has to be good, obviously, but I have no control over that. But if I can pick the audience and I can pick the geo, and we can figure out how to insert that engagement strategy of a QR code, maybe with some additional text overlay, we have a powerful solution. I would move money from my linear budget to test before I would just carve out a chunk of money and go, all right, we should be in this. Baby steps. We'll get there, but let's test it together.
And one of my favorite components of CTV is the accessibility, right? When we go to have conversations around linear, it's 50K a week minimum. So like to be able to test, 10K, even a bunch of things with 10K each, like that's the accessibility, I think, is going to continue to pay dividends for it.
Mike, I know we have to go to Q&A, but it will get to that point of spend. It's still, even though this technology is 7 years old, this medium is 7 years old, it's like TV budgets are still, dominating the landscape. There's $68 billion being spent on television, and there is $19 billion being spent on CTV. But that's really encouraging, because what that shows is two things. One, the playing field is not crowded right now. So if you want to get into CTV, you really have open playing field to work with. You are not going to be back to back to back to back to back on a sitcom where it's like 5 car dealers or, 5 local advertisers. your spot, and then the program comes back. That's very powerful. I think the budgets will get there. And we know that cord cutters will continue to grow, volume will continue to expand, which opens up avenues of opportunity for marketers and for DSPs like GroundTruth.
Amazing. Amazing. Tom, thank you so much for joining. I learned so much. I'm now going to spend so much more money on CTV now. It makes a ton of sense. So thank you so much for sharing.
You've got my email address, Mike.
Heck yeah, I do. Amazing. Tom, again, thank you. Now we're moving to the Q&A portion. So I'll ask Nicole and Tom to join me again on virtual stage. We have a couple questions that have come in. If anything comes in the meantime, just feel free to throw it in the Q&A. I had seen a couple. The first question was, and maybe this is one is directed towards Nicole, but we can talk about it as a team. It's what did the trends that you were discussing for e-commerce and all the efforts with social media platforms adding in online shopping options? How do you think about online shopping as it compares to, the behavior that you're seeing, and then also what we're seeing in social do?
Yeah, I mean, I can take that one. So I think they're referring to what is actually coined social shopping, which is where you could actually, through one of the social media platforms, make a purchase without ever going to the brand who's advertising's website. So you can, shop directly through the platform. I think it's definitely an outcome of some of the trends that I shared, particularly, people spending more time on smartphones. So this is, for people who are on social media apps on their phones, this is hassle-free and pretty convenient. And so playing off convenience, I think that's just key with connecting with consumers, is just be the easiest option. Like, whether it's in store or online, obviously e-commerce is, growing and a great channel for purchasing when it makes sense. So I think just having, whether it's curbside or click and collect, QR codes or easier ways to purchase, I think people are just looking for convenience right now.
Amazing. Thank you. All right. 2 other questions so far. Both on the technical side. The first one is, why is Google's number of proposals so different between web and Android, 23 versus 4? I think part of the answer is a technology question, and part of it is a timing question, right? The sandbox on web came out a year and a half ago before any of these rules were set, and they didn't really know what type of playing field they had to answer. There's still a lot that's going to be cut out of it. So what that nets out is probably, my guess is like 10 to 12. But I think they learned from that when they announced Android, and they say, okay, instead of like, what might we need to include, it's what do we absolutely need? And by going at it from that direction with the 4, they actually cover an extraordinary amount of space. So there's not a whole lot of space that's covered in web that's not covered in app. It just takes right now web 23 stories to get there, where they're getting there in 4 in app. So the 4 will probably increase, the 23 will definitely decrease. But that's what I would say from why the number is different so far. The last question we have is another one on technology, and it's about who are the leading on-device technologies. So the outside of Apple and Google and folks who've built their own infrastructure, there's not a whole lot in market today. If you talk to the average publisher on how you're monetizing your iOS inventory, it's not necessarily a happy story, and it hasn't gotten better in the past 6 months. So I don't necessarily, I don't think anyone's really leading. I think the other thing to consider is this, like 2/3 of this on-device push is coming from Android, which is happening at the end of next year, Android and Google. So we're just in the phase of things getting built. You had mentioned Permutive in the specific ask. They are an excellent company. Things that they're doing in the programmatic space haven't been as fleshed out yet. And I think about the way that they're doing on-device computing, they're only executing it now in a first-party data sense. So I think of Permutive as someone solving for first-party using on-device, not solving for the open space in the on-device opportunity. And then the last question is, for B2B marketing, would it be suggested to use LinkedIn ads over Google ads due to new cookie and sandbox policies for better website traffic and analytics? From a marketing perspective, the answer is no. Everybody's kind of the same. If you're going to Facebook.com or LinkedIn.com, they both have the same disadvantage if you're talking about buying things like off platform. If you're talking about tracking things within a B2B landscape, I would suggest, I think LinkedIn could be a very compelling thing moving forward, even more so because of the attribution of what goes on in their professional organization, rather than like somebody buying something on Nike. So I see LinkedIn as becoming much more valuable too. Yeah, Tom, please.
I just actually wrote something on B2B for CTV that I think is out on LinkedIn now. But if anybody's interested in that perspective, yeah, B2B has been challenging with specifically with really kind of any media, just in terms of scale. But the targeting capabilities within CTV really start to help narrow the elimination of waste. And I'd be happy to talk with anybody who has a B2B client that is interested in considering it.
Amazing. We're already friends on LinkedIn, but I'm going to creep you on LinkedIn, and everybody here, friend Tom, so you can get that access to that info. That's going to be money. And speaking of money, we're going to end this show 1 minute early. Congratulations to us. Thank you so much for Tom and Nicole for joining me for this spectacular show, the first or second this year of many. And thanks again to our host, GroundTruth, for putting this party together. Thanks to you for joining at home.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Nicole.
Bye, friends.